The 2025 NFL Draft is finally here. All the research we've been doing, grinding the video, looking at all the prospects, we finally get to find out where these guys are headed to at the next level. And I'll tell you what, for 2025, this is one of the most uncertain drafts that I feel like I've ever studied. There's a couple of guys at the very top of the draft that we know are going to go there no matter what. Kind of got the order figured out, but this year's draft has a lot of what ifs. How many quarterbacks are going to go in the first round? How far does Shedeur Sanders end up falling? Things are not looking great for him right now. Do the running backs end up getting drafted fairly early? How many edge rushers go in the first round? Lots of different things at play in this year's draft. And this is one of the most uncertain final mock drafts that I've ever done. And just for transparency purposes, my final mock draft before the 2024 draft, I had 28 of the 32 first round picks accurately predicted, with 6 of those players accurately predicted to the correct team. So while I feel very strongly that my research so far this year has really locked in on the guys that I know will go in the first round, I have no idea where a lot of these guys are going. Outside of trying to predict a March Madness bracket, trying to figure out the first round of the NFL draft seems just as hard, especially this season. But when I do my final mock draft, there's a few things that I take into account when placing players with their new teams. Number one, fit and position needed. What are some of the positions that are absolutely needed, and is it greater than the best player available on the board at that current time? Also, kind of my thoughts on what players seem to fit on what teams, and then I do take into account some of the noise that we hear right now, whether it be from scouts or media sources, and how loud those noises are. Where there's smoke, there's typically fire. And sometimes when we hear a lot about certain players, that means more than likely that information could end up being true. So mock draft 3.0, my final mock draft is going to look a little bit different than what you've probably seen from the consensus out there, but I feel good about some of these picks. Other picks, I have no idea what's going to happen. Let's start off at 1.1, and we already know who it's going to be. Cam Ward is going to the Tennessee Titans. I mean, it feels like this pick has been set in stone for quite some time, and I've had Cam Ward going to Tennessee for a while now. I don't think that they pass up on the next superstar NFL quarterback. I really like Cam Ward. Will Levis had his opportunity last season to seize that job. He didn't do it. They're going to be moving into a new stadium soon. No better way to bring in a new stadium than with a young quarterback that ends up becoming an NFL superstar. Speaking of star power, how about the Heisman winner from last year going to Cleveland? Cleveland needs some excitement for their fan base. They seem to be on the right track, and unfortunately, just over the last couple of years, they can't seem to get headed in the right direction. And a lot of that comes from that disastrous trade from Deshaun Watson. They're going to take a shot on Kenny Pickett, though, and I don't think them drafting Shedeur Sanders at number 2 overall is the right choice. I know a lot of people out there still feel like that's going to happen, but to me, Travis Hunter is a much better fit for this team. It's the star power and the excitement that they need for their fan base, but it also helps them at wide receiver and at cornerback. Now, my scouting report on Travis Hunter is as a wide receiver. Now, more than likely, he will play both ways, and in Cleveland, he absolutely should, but how often will he play both ways? Taking him on and off the field and giving him some breaks at the NFL level will absolutely be needed, but he can probably be out there a majority of the time on both sides of the ball. Now, his strengths as a wide receiver, he's a freak athlete. We already know this. He attacks the football, whether it be in coverage or in the open field, and his route running and fluid movements, you can tell from his feet and his hips, he's just got it. He is able to get in and out of his breaks very well. He looks very, very easy in terms of running his routes. He knows what he's doing. He sells his routes very well. His weaknesses, though, it's all about him being more physical at the NFL level. Now, at Colorado, a majority of his big plays came in the open field. He was just better than everybody around him. And with this offense playing out west in the Pac-12, whatever you want to call it now, Travis Hunter just was better than a majority of the people that he played against. So his strength on 50-50 balls, he's going to have to get better. Some of those balls that are just thrown up, he's going to have to go up and get those a little bit more aggressively. Also, his physicality at the line. Some of the stronger, bigger NFL cornerbacks are going to be able to knock him off his route a little bit easier. He's going to have to be stronger to fight through that contact. He's got the acceleration and the speed to get away from it once he does, but he can't get knocked too far off of his assignment. If he does, it's going to throw off the timing altogether. But as a wide receiver, the outlook on Travis Hunter, he's got a nose for the open field. If you put him in any type of situation where he's going to be finding open field, like as maybe a slot wide receiver, he's going to have a nose for it, and he's going to find a way to get himself open. But the strength of NFL secondaries are what could end up throwing him off. He's got to be a little bit more physical. How often will he play both sides of the ball, and will he return punts? He could be used all over the field. What I would do if I'm Cleveland, though, just find a way to get the ball in his hands. Now, here's where things could get really, really interesting, because people are talking about Shedeur Sanders to Cleveland at number 2, but they're also talking about him to the New York Giants at number 3. And they ended up having a last-minute meeting with him last week, but I think it's smoke. Yes, I do think the front office has basically told them, hey, we need to make sure we are doing what we need to make the right decision at number 3 overall. This is a make or break draft for Brian Daboll. However, I think some of that meeting with Shedeur Sanders is to maybe try and coax a team like the New Orleans Saints, the Las Vegas Raiders, somebody else, maybe even Pittsburgh, to come up to number 3, trade with them, so then they can draft Sanders at that point, and the New York Giants can move back and add a bunch of picks as well. So I don't think Shedeur Sanders is going to the New York Giants at number 3. If the Giants stay there, it is still Abdul Carter for me, who is the 1.02 player in this draft. He was the number 1 overall prospect for me. Travis Hunter did get that bump there just because Carter has been dealing with some injuries, but Carter is going to be very good. He's a very solid edge rusher that's going to be a superstar at the next level. Now, the New York Giants have Brian Burns and they have Kayvon Thibodeau already on the edge, but adding a guy like this should be an easy play. Because remember, with Thibodeau, they're gonna have the opportunity to pick up that 5th-year option here pretty soon. Do you pick it up and pay him a ton of money? Do you say no? He hasn't really been nearly as good as what that pick seemed like a couple of years back. So for me, if you got a guy like Abdul Carter sitting there where you can really make your defense elite and get those guys on and off the field and rotate them, maybe stand Brian Burns up at like the outside linebacker position and put all 3 of them together. There's a lot of things creatively you can do with that pass rush, and that's going to make you a very good football team. Do not pass on Carter for Shedeur Sanders. I have been talking about this guy for months, and at the combine, his name really exploded. Armand Memboou. This is a guy that I have loved for a while now, and I thought he was going to challenge for the number 1 offensive lineman ranking in this draft. He was already number 1 at the guard position by miles, and even though Will Campbell was my number 1 offensive tackle, for me personally, I think Memboou should go over him at this point. There's a lot of talk that he is going to be the number 1 offensive lineman taken off the board, and that really backs up some of the things that I've been saying for the last couple of mock drafts. At one point, I talked about Will Campbell going as the number 1 offensive lineman, but for this second straight mock draft, I have Memboou going here to the New England Patriots. Do I think this is going to happen? Maybe not. It really depends on what happens with Sanders, because if Carter or Hunter drop here, then that's absolutely going to be the pick. But if the first 3 picks make out the way that this happens, the New England Patriots should absolutely invest in protecting Drake May. You signed Stephon Diggs and you got him a weapon. Now get him an offensive lineman to absolutely protect him. You can play him at the guard, you can put him at offensive tackle, whatever you do, he's going to be a stud. He's still only 21 years old, and he reminds me a lot of Penei Sewell when he was drafted a few years back by the Detroit Lions. This is the type of player that Memboou could end up being. I've also talked about him being compared to like Zach Martin. He could absolutely be that type of player if he stays at the guard position. New England has to pick him up here. If you've got to do something to your offensive line, this is the best choice possible. At number 5, Jacksonville has basically been tied to Mason Graham for a majority of the offseason. There's some things that could end up happening. Heck, people talked about Jacksonville drafting Ashton Jeanty still at this point. So we'll see if that ends up happening. I don't think so. Their defense is terrible. If you need help stopping the pass, then you get a guy that can get after the quarterback. If you need help stopping the run, then you get a guy that can block up the interior of that offensive line so running backs have to jump the ball outside. Mason Graham does both of those things. He helps with the pass rush, he stops the run, and he will be a terror in the middle of that defensive line. Ashton Jeanty to the Las Vegas Raiders at number 6 should be absolutely locked in right now. They should have 1 or 2 backup plans, but Jeanty should be highlighted and circled on the big board, because if you do anything else, if Jeanty's there, you are messing up. Here is why. You decided to hire and bring in an older head coach, a veteran head coach in Pete Carroll, who has won and won big at the college and the NFL level. He's ready to turn this thing around right now. This is not a head coach that you bring in to try and rebuild for the next couple of years. You also decided to trade for Geno Smith, and you gave him a new contract on top of that. So drafting Shedeur Sanders to sit behind Smith for 1 or 2 years makes absolutely no sense. Your new head coach had a lot of success in Seattle with a guy like Geno Smith and Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson back then was a game manager that could definitely extend plays with his feet and was definitely good through the air. At times he did seem elite. At times he didn't. He was just very good. And Geno Smith over the last couple of years has been very good at times. That's the type of quarterback that you have right now. Give him an all-world running back the same way that Russell Wilson and that Seattle offense had Marshawn Lynch. You do that, you can turn this thing around immediately and you can compete in the AFC West. If you make a different decision here, you're likely picking inside the top 10 once again. And it's not very often that you find me going for a running back inside the top 6 all that often. But here, I think it's absolutely necessary. At number 7, the New York Jets. And now for the New York Jets, there's a little bit of a dark horse candidate here as well. But I'm going to go with Will Campbell. Move him out to right tackle. Help him replace Morgan Moses, who is out there and left in free agency. And protect the quarterback situation. You're already going to be rolling with Justin Fields, which will give you enough headaches as it is. You need to also protect him at this point. I don't see them drafting Shedeur Sanders either. Aaron Glenn is not going to put up with any of the garbage. If some of the things being said about Sanders are accurate, where a lot of people feel like his dad is going to have a lot to say or constantly be in people's business, or if he's just going to have the type of attitude where it's going to be difficult to deal with, Aaron Glenn isn't going to put up with that crap. And I don't think that drafting Shedeur Sanders is a great way to start off a new regime with the New York Jets. So for me and Aaron Glenn, get an Aaron Glenn type of guy. That's Will Campbell. Put him at right tackle. Who cares about the short arms and those measurements? He'll be able to stop people on that side of the offensive line just fine. Put him at right tackle, protect Justin Fields. But the dark horse candidate here, Jihad Campbell, linebacker out of Alabama. If he were to go here, I would not be shocked. There's a little bit of smoke out there about him potentially going a lot higher than people think. Him going here to the New York Jets would not shock me at all. At number 8, Carolina is a huge wild card for me because I think there are a ton of different options here for them. They could move back and acquire a ton of picks because, well, they kind of need that after the Bryce Young situation from a couple of years ago. They gave up an awful lot. They could recoup some of that with trading back here if someone wants to come up and draft Shedeur Sanders or maybe even Jackson Dart. So keep an eye on that here at number 8. Number 2, do they continue to add to their defense? Their defense was terrible last season, but they spent all of free agency helping build that up. That's why I'm going with Jalen Walker here, because you still have some holes, especially as an edge rusher here on this defensive line. Jalen Walker considered by many to be number 2 or number 3 in this edge class, and he definitely would be an upgrade for this defense. Now, here's the other thought process. It could be a pass catcher like Matthew Golden or Tet McMillan. Both of those guys would be great for Bryce Young, who needs to take another step forward, just like he did at the end of last season. But what about the tight end position? Tyler Warren, someone to help block and to be another weapon for Bryce Young. And that's why I think there's a ton of options here. They could trade back, they could go with edge, they could go with wide receiver, or they could go with tight end. I think all of those are definitely an option here for Carolina, and none of them would shock me. At number 9, the New Orleans Saints. And there are a lot of discussions about the Saints right now, especially last week when it came out that Derek Carr could end up missing the entire 2025 season. Now, last mock draft that I did, I had Shedeur Sanders going here, and that was even before they announced Derek Carr could end up missing the entire year. But then I sat down and I decided to jump into it a little bit further to really try and find out what could end up happening here. Because for me personally, after I read some information from NFL insiders, from beat reporters for the New Orleans Saints, it doesn't feel like Shedeur Sanders to the Saints is nearly as much of a lock as we think it is. Instead, what I feel like could end up happening here, they decide to go after a weapon and give Spencer Rattler a year to see if he could end up making it work. Because it sounds like the front office still likes Spencer Rattler and thinks that he could end up being a viable replacement for Derek Carr if Carr misses the entire year. So let's go with my number 1 overall wide receiver in this draft, Matthew Golden. One of the biggest issues last year for the New Orleans Saints was injuries to their pass catchers. And Chris Olave, who has had several concussions since coming into the league, is now a viable risk to miss significant time if he has another one. And you need a weapon to replace him. So put Matthew Golden on the outside, add Chris Olave on the other side as long as he's healthy. You've also got some other pass catchers coming back that if they stay healthy, then whoever ends up being the quarterback this year will have tons of weapons. And who knows, maybe if Shedeur Sanders falls enough, we could see New Orleans make a move for him. Maybe we see them make a move for a different quarterback in this draft class to put behind Spencer Rattler and to also compete with him as well. But this high for Shedeur Sanders right now, I don't know if it's worth it for New Orleans. At number 10 for the Chicago Bears, this might be one of my most shocking picks in this draft. But if you've been listening and you have your ear to the ground on the NFL news right now, Tyler Warren to the Chicago Bears is picking up steam and picking up steam fast. And a lot of it has to do with Ben Johnson, their new head coach, wanting to run 12 personnel. Now, if for some reason Ashton Jeanty falls this far, he's going to be the pick here. Absolutely. No shock in my mind. Would I be super shocked if it's Omarion Hampton? No, I wouldn't. Would I be shocked if it's an edge rusher? No, I wouldn't. But apparently there's a lot of talk right now that Ben Johnson wants to add a second tight end to run 12 personnel with Cole Kmet on the field and give Caleb Williams another pass catching weapon. And while Chicago could also opt to still reinforce their offensive line here, adding a guy like Tyler Warren does help with that because he's going to be a better blocker than Cole Kmet. And he's going to be a weapon that's actually going to be a little bit more versatile than Cole Kmet. So while I love Cole Kmet and he's done some really good things in the NFL so far, I do think that he could end up being limited in some aspects for what Ben Johnson wants to do with his offense. So while I think Tyler Warren is a lock here, I don't. I do think it could end up being somebody else, but I think Tyler Warren would not be a shock to anybody either. And when you take a look at what Tyler Warren can do with his scouting report, he is physical at the catch and blocking. He does everything 100% in terms of his physicality. He's also versatile inside any offensive scheme. You can put him out in the slot, you can throw him out wide, you can put him on the end line, you can put his hand in the ground, you can stand him up. Is he a full-time wide receiver? Absolutely not. Do not mess up the same way people did with Dalton Kincaid or Kyle Pitts. This is not a guy that you're going to move out to the outside and try to make him a slot receiver full time. Absolutely not. He is going to be on the end line a majority of the time with his hand in the ground, but he's very light on his feet. For being such a big tight end, he moves very well and he's very fluid. Now, on the weakness side of it, some things we need to get better at: consistency with blocking mechanics. Sometimes he lets his physicality physicality take over, and sometimes those mechanics can get a little sloppy. We can't do that at the NFL level because you're not just going to be able to out-physical everybody on every block. Now, speed to stretch the field on seam routes could also be an issue for him. And this is maybe one area that I think Cole Kmet could end up being a little bit better. Some of those seam routes where you try to stretch the field and find some room over the top if those safeties come into the box, that is where Cole Kmet could end up being a little bit better than Tyler Warren. But getting the ball in Tyler Warren's hands before 10 yards out, so anywhere between behind the line of scrimmage to 10 yards past the line of scrimmage, that's where Tyler Warren is going to be the best at the point of contact. Now, the outlook on Warren, he is the type of tight end that translates to the NFL right away. I could see him putting up very good numbers in his rookie year. He plays hard all the time. Even when he is blocking, he does not take plays off. Needs to refine his technique a little bit more, but he'll pick that up quick and they'll get him coached up very well, and he could end up being a star in the NFL. Now, if you're a returning viewer, you already know about it, but if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners, I got to tell you about our 2025 Fantasy Football Draft Guide. If you play fantasy football and you want to leg up on your competition, our draft guide will be the best investment that you make all season long. Now, the scouting report that you just saw on screen for Tyler Warren, and you'll see for other guys on screen as well, will be in our draft guide that will be releasing during the NFL draft. And there's not only going to be scouting reports for guys like Tyler Warren and Travis Hunter, but there's going to be scouting reports for guys all the way through to the 7th round, and maybe even some undrafted free agents as well. If you play Dynasty League or Keeper Leagues, or even if you just want to leg up on your competition, getting our draft guide and getting ahead of your competition with our scouting reports for rookies is going to be essential. And not only are you going to get a ton of rookie and Dynasty content right when it opens, but you're also going to get a ton of redraft content that will update and post throughout the summer until week 1 of the NFL draft. So head on down to the link in the description, get your draft guide pre-ordered right now, and if you do, you're going to get access during the NFL draft, and it's going to be time to get ready for the fantasy season. At number 11 for San Francisco, they could either go edge rusher or offensive tackle here. Those seem like the two most likely positions. And for me, Shamar Stewart is a guy that I've had inside the top 10 for a majority of the year. But seeing as how there's some different names inside right now, Shamar Stewart falls just a little bit. Now, an offensive tackle would end up replacing Trent Williams at some time, probably next season. And it would be good to have somebody to maybe key in right now. If a guy like Will Campbell is here, you could move him to guard this year and then out to tackle next season. But for these purposes, let's go with Shamar Stewart, because you've been experiencing with the 49ers with different edge rushers on the other side of Bosa for a few years now. Get yourself a young guy to go on the other side of Bosa and help him out. The numbers for Bosa have been incredible, but just think if they could have a consistent young guy getting into the backfield on the other side, that's going to help everybody out on the defense, your cornerbacks, your linebackers. It's going to make things a lot easier with having that type of pass rush, and that's why I think inevitably San Francisco ends up going with an edge rusher here. At number 12, I really feel like the Dallas Cowboys need to get another weapon on the other side of CeeDee Lamb. And Ted McMillan falling this far a few months ago absolutely was not going to happen. He was not only a top 5 player, but he was the number 1 wide receiver in this draft class. Travis Hunter's getting more hype, and then Matthew Golden is getting more hype now. And Ted McMillan has fallen a little bit because there are some concerns over his 40 time, but he plays a lot faster on film than what we saw from that 40 time, and I don't have nearly as many concerns as what other people do. He is still going to be my wide receiver 3 in this draft class if you consider Travis Hunter to be number 1. If you take Travis Hunter out of the equation, Matthew Golden is number 1 for me, Ted McMillan is number 2. But when you take a look at Ted McMillan and his scouting reports, he has got some of the best short area quickness and burst for wide receivers in this draft class. I love what he can do over the middle of the field, and he consistently wins at the point of the catch. He wins down the field, he wins over the middle of the field, he wins on the sideline. This is a guy that goes up and gets the ball, he fights through the ball, he does a lot of really good things. Now, he's got an NFL wide receiver body. He is the type of strong wide receiver receiver that you want at the NFL level. And I just mentioned it a second ago with his weakness, kind of the breakaway speed and the separation down the field. He was seen as a guy in college that could separate down the field, but now as you watch some film and if you see his 40 time, there might be some concerns that he's going to be able to outrun some of the better NFL cornerbacks. I think that he'll end up being just fine. I think that he plays very well, and even if he can't separate as much as we would like to, he's so good at the point of catch that he can make up for some of that. The outlook on McMillan, he's going to win all over the field, especially on the intermediate routes, the short routes, doing some screens with him, things like that. He does lack some top-end speed and some separation ability at the top of his routes, but he's going to be a big play threat, especially when you get a lot of one-on-one coverage. And that's where Tet McMillan could be very, very good. Even if he's not going to run away from every NFL cornerback, if they're giving a lot, if NFL defenses are taking a look at CeeDee Lamb and they're taking a look at Jake Ferguson, and now you've got one-on-one coverage with Tet McMillan on the other side, he's going to win a lot of those one-on-one receptions because he makes up for it by dominating the high point of the catch in those type of situations. Tet McMillan to Dallas feels like a really good fit, and hopefully Dallas is strongly considering this. And number 13, the Miami Dolphins. And this is a pick that I've had here a couple of different times now. Kelvin Banks Jr., offensive tackle out of Texas. Now, Teron Armstead kind of retired out of nowhere. Miami knew that they maybe only had 1 year left with them, but I don't think they expected him to kind of hang it up after free agency this season, leaving them in a little bit of a bind. And now they really need to invest in the offensive line to protect Tua, because if you don't do that, he could miss significant time, and we've already seen it. When he misses significant time, this offense just is not right. Kelvin Banks would be a great fit for Miami, and he goes to left tackle to replace Armstead. At number 14, the Indianapolis Colts. And basically everybody and their mother has a tight end locked in here. I don't think that happens. To me personally, when you look at the way Chris Ballard has drafted over his years, going tight end in round 1 doesn't feel like a Chris Ballard move. Going with a guy like Jihad Campbell does feel like a Chris Ballard move. They need some help in the middle of their defense. And if Tyler Warren were still here, maybe I would consider it, but I don't see them going with a guy like Colston Loveland. They still have Jelani Woods on the roster, who was a 3rd round pick for them not too long ago. He has still got some time. And there's a couple of tight ends in this draft that in round 2 or round 3, or maybe even round 4, could go in behind Woods and still be suitable replacements. For me personally, Jihad Campbell is a guy that is trending up, and I could see him going to Indianapolis fairly easy. Listen, it feels like every year that I've been doing draft research, I send an edge rusher to the 1st round for the Atlanta Falcons, and that's basically because over the last 4 seasons, they've been in the bottom 10 of pass rush win rate every single year. They do not get after the quarterback well, and they haven't for quite some time. And last year, going with a guy like Dallas Turner to Atlanta felt right. But then they went with Michael Penix instead, which caught everybody off guard. And while they could catch somebody off guard this year, going with a guy like Mike Green, last year's FBS sack leader, feels like an absolute must-need for the Atlanta Falcons. Maybe I'm wrong again here with this pick, but they really need to go with the edge because on defense, they've got to do a lot better at getting after the quarterback. Going with Jahdae Barron to the Arizona Cardinals might be a little bit of a shock to those of you who are Cardinals fans or may have felt like a different pick here would be a whole lot better. But here's the problem. When you play out west and you have to go up against Matthew Stafford, and you're going to have to go up against Sam Darnold now, and you're going to have to go up against a guy like Brock Purdy with his weapons there in San Francisco, you need to shut down the pass. And last season, their secondary ranked in the bottom 3rd of most passing yards allowed per attempt. So going with a guy like Jahdae Barron to put out there on the field to hopefully start shutting down some of these quarterbacks and opposing wide receivers you're going to have to face off against this year seems like a really good bet for this Arizona Cardinals defense to start playing a little bit better, and hopefully this offense can go ahead and take a step forward as well. At number 17 for Cincinnati, it's pretty simple. Defense, because you invested a ton of money this offseason, but you did it on offense to really two players, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. You're already paying Joe Burrow a buttload as well. You need cheap, young guys on the defensive side of the ball. Sam Hubbard retired unexpectedly. Trey Hendrickson has told you he wants out, and he is going to require some sort of a massive extension as well. He has not been traded as of yet, but it could end up happening, which makes it even more important to get a guy like Michael Williams, coming from Georgia, a defensive player on the edge that's going to help get pressure after the quarterback. And even if you do end up bringing back Trey Hendrickson and he plays this year, or if you sign him to a new deal, Michael Williams on the other side will be a really good fit in this defense, because let's face it, you're going to have problems stopping teams. So why don't you try to get over the quarterback and at least make it difficult to complete passes? At number 18, Seattle's going to have a big decision to make here, and this is where a lot of teams, and even us as analysts and even you as viewers, have a tough time trying to figure out. Is it better for a team to draft for need at this point, or is it better to go best player available? Because if you need to draft for need, Tyler Booker here makes a lot of sense. Interior offensive lineman out of Alabama. In fact, over the course of the last two mock drafts I've done, if I didn't give the Seattle Seahawks a lineman here, Seattle Seahawk fans let me know about it. And they were like, I don't see how you can go anybody that is not on the offensive line. But that's where this conundrum comes into play, because if you're going best player available, it's not Tyler Booker. For instance, Will Johnson, who is falling in this draft, and we'll talk about in a minute, if he's still available there for Seattle at this point, how could you pass on him and not create two absolute shutdown corners in Will Johnson and Devin Witherspoon? That's best player available by a mile and would be the much smarter decision. But for me, in this mock draft, let's go ahead and talk about drafting for need, protecting Sam Darnold, making your run game a lot better, and giving Mike McDonald a whole lot better offensive line than what you had a year ago. And Tyler Booker would do exactly that. He might not be best player available, and to me, him along with Jared Wilson, the two interior offensive linemen that are ranked after Mimbowu, they're fringe one players. They're fringe round one players. I've got round two grades on them, but it would not shock me if they went in the first round either. But we'll see what Seattle decides to do here. Okay, now let's talk about Will Johnson going to Tampa Bay at number 19. Do I think it's likely he falls this far? Probably not. This is a guy that for me was a top 5 player and a consensus top 10 pick just a few weeks ago. But the biggest problem is how he has been injured, because now for the better part of 2 seasons at Michigan, he's missed time, including over a majority of the year last season. But then he wasn't healthy enough for the combine, he wasn't healthy enough for his pro day, and then he decided to hold a private workout instead where he still did not run the 40. So there's going to be a team that will likely decide that he is still capable of being a top 10, top 15 type of player, and will be willing to take that risk for him. But I think there are a lot of questions still to be asked about Will Johnson, and he's the one player in this class I could see slip and slip quickly. And it's happened before. Lots of good players fall in the first round and they fall quickly. Sometimes there's teams that just are like, this guy will never be here. So they fall in love with another player. And when that guy shows up, they're like, we love this guy. I can't go ahead and do it. I'm going to have to pass on him once again. And he falls even further. We're going to talk about falling with another player here in just a minute. But Will Johnson going here to Tampa Bay, I think is an excellent fit. Does it end up happening? Probably not. And if you're a Tampa Bay fan, there's still a lot of questions about him. But when you take him and you pair him with some of the talent you already have there on defense, and what with Todd Bowles can do on defense, Will Johnson is the type of player that are going to help shut down the quarterbacks that you're going to be facing as Tampa Bay, especially if you plan on winning the NFC South once again this season. When you get to the playoffs, having a cornerback like Will Johnson is definitely going to be a piece that you've been missing here in recent years. And number 20, Omarion Hampton. Maybe my favorite player in this draft. I love Omarion Hampton, and if he goes higher than 20, it wouldn't come close to shocking me. Hampton is a future NFL superstar. He is a guy that I definitely is a lot closer to Ashton Genty than what I think a lot of people realize. And in Denver, who hasn't had a clear-cut RB1 for a couple of years now, definitely could utilize him to help take the pressure off Bo Nix. But it's also going to create a lot of room to run with how good the passing was last year for this Denver offense. Give me Omari and Hampton in Denver to be a stud player and really help take this offense to the next level. At number 21, Jackson Dart to the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's no surprise that I like Dart to the Steelers because I had him here earlier. And it's no surprise that I like Dart because I've been talking about him as the potential quarterback 2 in this class for months now. If you're hearing a lot of hype on Jackson Dart, I'm going to be honest with you. It probably started on this channel. Maybe I'm giving myself a little bit too much credit here, but back in January, I was talking about how good Jackson Dart could end up being. There's one question you're asking yourself right now. Kyle, you have Jackson Dart going to Pittsburgh, but you haven't talked about Shedeur Sanders yet. That's because I do think Shedeur Sanders falls. Does he fall behind Jackson Dart? Maybe not. But there is a lot of negative talk about Shedeur Sanders right now, and I don't think teams necessarily view him as the high upside weapon that a lot of teams view Cam Ward or Jackson Dart as. Jackson Dart may not be as fluid as Shedeur Sanders when it comes to certain parts of the game in terms of like accuracy and some decision making, but he is the type of quarterback that will win you games, will win you divisions, and will win you playoff games. He's got a big arm. He goes down the field well. He works the sideline well. He does intermediate routes well. He goes deep well. Sometimes his decision making, yeah, he's a gunslinger. He's a Brett Favre type of player. You're going to see that, but he's athletic, he's capable, and he has the type of upside that the Steelers really need and have lacked in quite some time. In number 22 to the Los Angeles Chargers, Colston Loveland has been here every single mock draft for me, and I'm going to stick with him here. I love this fit, and he's definitely a guy that would be utilized right away in this offense. With his former head coach, Jim Harbaugh, he would be a weapon for Justin Herbert. He would be a great blocker on the offensive line, and he would definitely be a guy that would be utilized right away along with Ladd McConkey. And his scouting report, I mean, the athleticism and route running out of this world. He definitely is one of the better athletic tight ends that we have seen in a while. There's been some good ones, but he's definitely one that stands out. He's got some burst after the catch, and he's a vertical threat. When he catches the football, he can pick up extra yards, and he can pick them up quick. If you watch some of the plays that he's made against a team like Ohio State, you can see it, especially the vertical threat where he can go down the seam. Some of his weakness, he can get a little high sometimes while he's engaged with blocks. He definitely has to stay lower, and you can see some of those drops that he's made over the course of his NFL career are definitely concentration issues. Got to be concentrated a little bit longer, watch that ball in, and not try to get up the field as quickly. His outlook at the NFL level is a prolific weapon in the passing game that can beat man or zone coverages. He's not going to be afraid to block, and he's not going to be afraid to get dirty. Some concentration issues, which we already talked about, that's a must. He's going to have to get a whole lot better there. But this offense in LA with Greg Roman, it's definitely going to be the perfect fit for him. At number 23 for Green Bay fans, let me hear it here. What are you thinking in terms of what you want to see happen in the first round? Green Bay could be one of those teams that ends up, trading back a little bit if a team wants to move in. But Green Bay is likely to release Jair Alexander at some point after the draft if they can't trade him. And if you do that, it's going to create an opening at cornerback that you're going to need to fill. And a guy like Maxwell Harrison ran himself into the first round. If he's not a first round pick, he's going to be early second round pick. He was the fastest guy at the combine. He's got the length and the size that you want at the cornerback position and the speed to not only recover against really good wide receivers, but keep good wide receivers receivers from getting away from him. You're going to have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Jameson Williams. You're going to have Amon-Ra St. Brown. You're going to have Romo Dunze. You're going to have DJ Moore. You got a lot of really good wide receivers in the NFC North. Having a guy like Maxwell Harrison could be one of the better picks of the first round, even if Green Bay fans don't love it. Nick Emenwari out of South Carolina, I don't see how he drops to number 24, but it feels like he's not going to be prioritized the same way that a guy like Kyle Hamilton was a couple of years ago. Now, Kyle Hamilton was the number 1 overall player for me for a good portion of my research for that draft class. He was an absolutely insane athletic player at the safety position, and there were also guys like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah out of Notre Dame, just like Kyle Hamilton, that was going to be that type of weapon that could play linebacker. He could play safety. He could be a hybrid. Sometimes some of those players get overlooked, and Nick Emenwari feels like the same type of guy. He's a little bit more of a natural safety, but he's an athletic freak. So he could come up and play the run. He could play the nickel and corner coverage. He could play back at safety. He could help over the top. He could play in the box. He could do a lot of different things. And unfortunately, you're going to be losing Harrison Smith, who has been a great weapon on defense for Minnesota over the last several years. He's very close to retirement. And using Nick Emenwari all over the place this year and then replacing Harrison Smith next year could be a big key for not only the defense now, but moving forward and staying competitive. This is the 3rd straight mock draft where I've had Josh Simmons going to the Houston Texans. Houston needs to draft an offensive lineman, and Josh Simmons was a top 5 player and the number 1 offensive tackle in this year's draft class until he got hurt at the end of the year. And as long as his medicals turn out just fine, he's definitely going to be a first-round pick. And he may end up even going a little bit higher than this, but for him to fall all the way to Houston would not be shocking. And if Houston were to get him, this could be one of the biggest wins of the first round. At number 26, the LA Rams drafting Shedeur Sanders. Now, if you're an LA Rams fan, you probably don't love this pick. Hold on. Don't yell, okay? Don't blame me. Don't get upset with me. Just hear me out for a second. Matthew Stafford's not getting any younger. And while he still does some very good things at the quarterback position, you can tell that he's not the athlete that he used to be. And he doesn't have the arm that he used to have. The injuries over the course of his career are starting to wear on him. And he was almost gone. He almost left this year. There was definitely a really big concern that the Rams were going to try and trade him. Now, he decides to come back, and they end up getting a new deal done, but that doesn't mean that the same thing won't happen this year and that LA will finally decide to move on. So if you have an opportunity to draft a guy like Shedeur Sanders, you should absolutely do it, because last year you spent the draft really building your team back up to a competitive state, and you did a very good job with that. Now in this year's draft, you still need to plan for the future a little bit as well. And doing that at the quarterback position may be more important than it's ever been for the LA Rams. Because if something happens to Stafford or he decides to move on next year, you're going to have a big glaring hole that you have to fix. But let's talk about Shedeur Sanders himself for just a second, because I do think there's going to be some comments that aren't necessarily positive towards me when it comes to putting Sanders this far down in the first round. I think there's something to be said about what can be unexpected for the first round of an NFL draft. And there are quarterbacks that were much better prospects than Shedeur Sanders that fell. Take a look at a guy like Aaron Rodgers. Look at the slide that he had in the first round all the way down to Green Bay. Geno Smith wasn't necessarily a good quarterback prospect, but everyone had him as a consensus first-round draft pick. He slid out of the first round. What about a guy like Will Levis a couple of years ago? Will Levis, leading up to the draft in the last few days before the draft occurred, there was talk that Will Levis could be a top 3 pick, and he wasn't even drafted in the first round. He went from being top 3 to outside the first round. Now, Shedeur Sanders is way better than Geno Smith and Will Levis. He's a much better prospect. But there are some concerns about his mentality. Is he going to come in and be a guy that some teams are going to look at as a guy that's going to have too much ego, that you're going to have to try to control? Is he going to be the type of leader that you need for a rebuilding franchise? Maybe. Maybe people see him like that. Some people don't, however. I think there's also some concerns about his dad. I mean, Deion Sanders is not a quiet guy, and he is somebody that really tried to control where Shedeur Sanders landed as well. That could turn some teams off. I get it if they pass on Sanders because of that. I do think Sanders slides. I don't think he goes in the top 5. Realistically, if he goes in the top 10, it's to New Orleans, or if a team decides to trade up for him. But I think there is a 50-50 shot that he falls outside the top 10 picks. And I also think there's about a 30% chance that he falls to the end of the first round. But going to the Rams and sitting behind Matthew Stafford could be exactly the type of atmosphere that Shedeur Sanders needs to learn how to be a leader inside this clubhouse, inside this locker room. He's not going to get his number retired like he did at Colorado all that quickly, but he's going to be a good quarterback. At number 27, Malachi Starks to play alongside Kyle Hamilton with the Baltimore Ravens. That's going to be a tremendous duo in the back of that defense. Now, Malachi Starks is still seen by some people as a top 10 player in this draft class, but he's also a little bit overshadowed by Emanwari, who is my safety 1 now, and Malachi Starks falls back to number 2. There's some concerns about what you see on tape from him last year and some of his production numbers as well, but he's still a first round talent for me and would be a really good player in this secondary. Donovan Ezuraku, the Boston College edge rusher that has quickly flown up draft boards since the combine, lands here with the Detroit Lions, and he's a pretty popular pick to go to the Lions here at the end of the first round. Now, I will tell you, a dark horse candidate to go here to Detroit is Jared Wilson from Georgia, the center / guard that absolutely could fill in at the guard position. And then if Frank Ragnow, who's been playing with retirement talk for a couple of years and has dealt with a lot of injuries, if he decides to move on at some point in time over the next year or two, he easily slides into that center position and takes over right away. So while Detroit obviously needs an edge rusher and needs to keep that edge very set on the other side across from Aiden Hutchinson, taking an offensive guard here should still be a possibility and wouldn't shock me. At number 29 for Washington, they need an edge rusher to replace Dante Fowler, who left in free agency. So let's go with James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee. There are some concerns, especially some character concerns with him, but he's still a top 15 talent for me in this draft. He's going to slide because of some of those things, but he's definitely a guy that's going to come in and help win right away on this defensive line. Hopefully this locker room is stable enough for him with a guy like Jaden Daniels leading the way to really kind of reel in some of those character issues, and he becomes an NFL superstar. Just like Seattle, this is another, do we need to fill a need or do we need best player available here? Because for the Buffalo Bills, you could go some different directions. If you feel you need to fill a need, then it's probably the cornerback position. You really need to make sure your cornerbacks are solid right now. If for some reason one of the top safeties fall, maybe you take a look at one of the safeties to go alongside DeMar Hamlin. But for me personally, I'm going to go best player available. That's also a little bit of a need for them with Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss, the interior of the defensive line. Now, do they need a defensive tackle? They don't, because you got Ed Oliver there, who's obviously stacked and going to help quite a bit. But then you got Daquan Jones, who's 33 and getting a little bit older. And then you also signed Larry Ogunjobi. He's suspended for the first 6 games of the season, though. So Walter Nolan is a guy that could rotate a little bit to begin the year, and then as the year goes on, play a little bit more and a little bit more. And this is best player available here, but I do think it's part of a need for Buffalo as well. As we get to the last couple of picks here of the first round, I could see Kansas City moving up. I could see them trading out of the first round, which we'll talk about here with Philadelphia in just a second. But you got your butts handled in the Super Bowl because you couldn't stop the pass rush for Philadelphia. And then you end up trading away probably your best offensive lineman in Joe Thuney, who was a stud at the guard position, even if he did get a little bit exposed after moving outside to tackle. And Juwan Taylor is getting older and a liability when it comes to offensive penalties. So for me personally, I do think that you need to invest in the offensive line to protect Patrick Mahomes a little bit more. Josh Conley Jr. is seen as a fringe round one type of talent. Some people think he's a top 15 player, a top 20 player. Some people think he's just outside the first round. Me personally, I have a second round grade on him. I do think he's going to be a very good offensive tackle. I just don't know if he's going to be as good as some of the bigger guys in this draft class are a little bit ahead of him. But he still would fit in nicely somewhere on this offensive line. I do think that he could move inside to guard if you needed him to. I think he could play right tackle. I think he could play left tackle if you wanted him to. So when you take a look at Conley Jr., I do think you end up drafting him to help reinforce your offensive line and make sure that Patrick Mahomes isn't getting smoked by really good pass rushes once again. At number 32, the Philadelphia we have a trade. It's the Cleveland Browns coming up into the first round. Now, do they trade with the Philadelphia Eagles? I don't know. I'm not necessarily saying that the Browns are going to trade with the Eagles, but I do think Cleveland is going to move into the back half of the first round, and specifically to target Jalen Milroe. Now, Jalen Milroe is a guy that has some absolute fantastic traits. He is a guy that could end up being just a game changer at the quarterback position. While there's some really good things that you see when you take a look at his film against a team like Georgia last season, there are some terrible things that you see when you take a look at his game film against teams like Michigan in the Rose Bowl and this past year in their bowl game, because in both of those bowls, he was exposed and he didn't look anything like an NFL quarterback. Now, the scouting report on Jalen Milroe, again, he is going to be just an absolute freak athletic playmaker. His playmaking ability outside of the pocket, one of the best in this draft class, if not the best. He can run, he can throw on the run, he can get outside the pocket and make things happen, and he's got a ton of arm strength. He is the type of quarterback that can launch the ball to all portions of the field. And the rushing ability, obviously, I've already talked about it. Now, his weaknesses, listen, he's going to have struggles against NFL-style defenses. He did in college. While he played well against, a team like Georgia last year, when Michigan threw multiple looks at him the last couple of seasons, he struggled in both of those games against the Michigan Wolverines. And when you take a look at what they do on defense, it's very similar to some of these other NFL-style defenses that he's going to see now. His pocket presence and processing is an issue. When he's in the pocket, he has an issue going through progressions and finding who he needs and processing what's happening on the defensive side of the ball. When he gets outside of the pocket and he can get out there and make some different things happen, then he starts to take a step forward. But you can't do that all the time at the NFL level, and he's going to need to work on the accuracy. Milroe is going to be drafted off athletic traits alone, and they're going to hope that they can help him grow as a quarterback, but his career may be limited at that position. I don't know for a fact that he's going to be a Jalen Hurts type of quarterback, and that's what some people think. The rushing ability was some things that need to be worked on. He could come in, sit for a year, and then be a guy that's an absolute stud moving on. He's a very good football player, but he lacks some essential quarterback skills. And if he were to be drafted to the Cleveland Browns, who ended up trading for Kenny Pickett, you could have him sit for a year behind Kenny Pickett, maybe 2 years, really work with him, grow him, and let him become your quarterback of the future in a couple of years. That is where things could get really interesting for Jalen Milroe. And I really do believe, based on what I'm hearing right now, from what NFL insiders are saying, draft people are saying, it does look like the Cleveland Browns want to come back into the first round, and it does sound like that they are in love with Jalen Milroe. Well, there you have it, my final mock draft before the 2025 NFL draft. This one was a lot of fun to do because there was a few different things I took into account. And if you take a look, all mock drafts are different this time of the year. There are a few picks that a lot of analysts agree on. There are a few picks that some analysts are just throwing out there to make a little bit of noise and play a what if scenario. And that's absolutely fine. I don't have an issue with that because I do that sometimes too, to play out a different scenario and see how things could happen. This mock draft, there wasn't a whole lot of trades because quite honestly, I think there could be a lot of different trades. I don't think there's going to be a ton of overall trades, but I do think there are a lot of trade options, and maybe we see 2 or 3 in the first round that could potentially shake some things up. So instead of doing all these different trade scenarios, I said, let's just go with the way it is. Let's talk about Cleveland coming back into the first round to get Jalen Milroe. And there's going to be some picks here that you don't agree with that won't happen. There's going to be some picks that you don't agree with that could still end up happening. This was a lot of fun to do though. Mock draft season is over. Time to get ready for Thursday night. We've got a lot of draft content this week. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, stick around, hit the like button, turn the bell notifications on. Anytime we drop new content this week, you'll know about it right away. But for now, Headliner Nation, I'm going to get out of here. Peace out. Stay safe. Stay healthy. And I'll catch you all on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.